The hallway smelled of brick dust and blood. Hauptmann Klaus Dieter Voss pressed his back against a shattered concrete pillar. 40 meters inside a building his company had been ordered to clear by nightfall. The order had seemed simple that morning. It no longer seemed simple now. September 14th, 1942. Stalingrad, Red October Factory District. Dust drifted through the fractured ceiling as distant gunfire echoed through the concrete skeleton of the factory. What had begun as a routine advance had turned into a suffocating maze of shadows, shattered machinery, and unseen enemies waiting beyond every doorway. From somewhere beyond the collapsed stairwell, the sound came again, not the precise, measured crack of a bolt-action rifle. A sound like tearing canvas, long, continuous, obscene in its volume. One Soviet soldier, somewhere in the darkness ahead, was pouring more rounds downrange in 4 seconds than Voss's entire section could manage in a minute. Voss had heard rumors about the weapon they called the papasha, the little father. He had dismissed them the way veteran officers dismiss battlefield gossip. He was not dismissing anything now. He reached down to his belt and confirmed what he already knew. His P-38 pistol held 8 rounds. His MP-40, holstered on a dead corporal 3 rooms back, held 32. The Soviet soldier in the darkness ahead held 71. In that moment, crouched in the rubble of a city that both armies were consuming alive, Voss understood something that no briefing in Berlin had prepared him for. The Wehrmacht had not simply encountered a better weapon. It had encountered an entirely different philosophy of industrial war, and that philosophy was winning. If this kind of deep dive into the weapons, logistics, and human moments that actually decided the Second World War is what you're after, then subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The Wehrmacht that crossed into the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, was by any objective measurement the finest infantry force on the planet. Its soldiers were disciplined, experienced, and equipped with weapons refined through 2 years of victorious European warfare. The Karabiner 9.8K, the standard-issue bolt-action rifle carried by the 9-man German infantry squad, was a masterpiece of pre-war German precision manufacturing. Its barrel tolerances were exact to fractions of a millimeter. Its trigger pull was crisp and consistent. At 400 meters against a single stationary target, it was nearly without equal. It also required 13.22 man-hours to build. Every component demanded skilled machinists operating precision lathes in properly heated factories. Every tolerance demanded a craftsman who had trained for years before touching a weapon. The philosophy baked into the Karabiner 9.8K was the same philosophy baked into the Wehrmacht itself. Fewer weapons, better trained soldiers, longer engagement ranges, superior marksmanship over raw volume. It had worked in Poland. It had worked in France. It had worked everywhere the Wehrmacht had fought, because everywhere the Wehrmacht had fought, the distances were long and the enemy had been taught to fight the same way. The Soviet Union was not France. In the dense pine forests of Bryansk, in the frozen ravines outside Tula, in the rubble canyons of Kharkov, the dominant engagement range was not 400 meters. It was 80. It was 50. It was the width of a hallway and the length of a burning room. At those distances, the Karabiner 9.8K's magnificent accuracy was worth nothing. What mattered at 50 meters was not precision. What mattered was volume. And volume was exactly what 9 bolt-action rifles, each holding 5 rounds and requiring a full manual cycling stroke between shots, could not provide. The average German infantry squad could sustain approximately 15 aimed rounds per minute per rifleman in combat conditions. 9 men working together could theoretically project 135 rounds per minute across a frontage. In clean field conditions against targets presenting themselves at 200 meters, that was adequate. Against entrenched Soviet defenders in rubble, with fields of fire measured in meters and flanks defined by collapsed walls, it was catastrophic. Enter Georgy Spagin. Spagin was not a romantic figure. He was not a hero of the Civil War or a decorated frontline commander. He was a weapons designer who understood manufacturing. In the desperate summer of 1941, as Soviet GKO directives demanded weapons in quantities that staggered even optimistic planners, Spagin sat with a drafting table and a fundamentally different question than the one German engineers had been asking for decades. The German question was, how accurate can we make this weapon? Spagin's question was simpler and more brutal. How fast can we make as many of these as possible? The answer became the PPSH-41, where the Karabiner 9-8K demanded 13.22 hours of skilled labor. The PPSH-41 needed 5.6 hours of predominantly unskilled labor to produce, a 59% reduction in manufacturing time. The receiver was stamped from flat 2mm carbon steel sheet under 40 tons of force in a single press operation that took 8 seconds. The barrel jacket was welded, not machined. The hinged front pivot connecting the 2 receiver halves required alignment, not threading. A worker who had been operating a textile machine 6 months earlier could learn to assemble a PPSH-41 in a week. Factories in Moscow, Zagorsk, and in newly evacuated facilities deep in the Ural Mountains began delivering 3,000 units per day by the spring of 1942, 3,000 weapons every single day, from facilities that had been farmland 18 months before. The Soviet industrial evacuation minus 1,523 factories, relocated east of the Urals between July and November 1941, was one of the great logistical achievements of the 20th century, and the PPSH-41 was its most lethal product. The weapon itself was, by the aesthetic standards of German arms manufacture, genuinely ugly. Its stamped receiver wore the marks of the press. Its wooden stock was rough. Its muzzle compensator, a stamped steel extension with cooling slots cut into the metal, jutted forward like an afterthought. German soldiers who first captured one in 1941 reportedly found it crude, primitive, almost contemptible. Then they fired it. The 71-round drum magazine, copied directly from the Finnish Suomi KP-31 design captured during the Winter War, fed 7.62 by 25 millimeters Tokarev cartridges into the chamber at a cyclic rate of 900 rounds per minute. At full automatic, the drum emptied in 4.7 seconds. In tactical doctrine, 5 to 7 round bursts were standard, but the mathematics did not require tactical elegance to devastate. A single Soviet soldier carrying 2 drum magazines held 142 rounds of fully automatic firepower, 4 times the ammunition capacity of the German MP-40. 9 times the sustained fire rate of the Karabiner 98K he replaced. At Tula in October 1941, this mathematics encountered its first serious test. The 2nd Panzer Army under Guderian pressed toward Tula through deteriorating autumn roads and deteriorating German momentum. The city's defense fell not only to professional soldiers, but to factory worker militias, men pulled from the very assembly lines that had been producing the T-34 tanks, now facing Guderian's panzers. These workers received early PPS H-41s, still warm from local production runs. They had little training. They had no combat experience. But at the close ranges forced by Tula's urban geography, training mattered less than firepower density. The 2nd Panzer Army's infantry probes were broken, not by marksmen, by volume. A German officer named Hans von Luck, writing after the war, described the experience of facing Soviet close-range assault groups as a wall of fire. The phrase was not literary flourish. It was arithmetic. A Soviet assault group of 8 men, each carrying a PPS H-41 with a 71-round drum, could project a combined 5,600 rounds per minute against a single point. The German platoon opposing them, equipped with bolt-action rifles and a single MG-34 machine gun, could answer with perhaps 900 rounds per minute at best, and only if the MG-34 crew was alive, supplied, and able to depress their weapon to the engagement angle required. The MG-34 was the philosophical cornerstone of German infantry tactics. The doctrine held that a single belt-fed machine gun, operated by a trained 2-man crew, provided the unit's primary suppressive fire. Riflemen existed to protect the machine gun and exploit its effect. It was a sound doctrine for open terrain and 300-meter engagements. It was a fatal doctrine in Stalingrad's factory district, where a single MG-42 position in a third-floor window could be silenced for the 17 seconds it took a Soviet assault group to close the final 30 meters, not by a more accurate weapon, but by 8 PPS H-41 drums firing simultaneously through the window frame, filling the aperture with a volume of lead that made precision irrelevant. This was a tactical inversion that no German staff college had prepared its officers to answer. Oberst Wilhelm Adam, serving as adjutant to the 6th Army in Stalingrad, noted the shift in his diary entries through November 1942, with the careful language of a man unwilling to fully name what he was observing. German officers were picking up captured Soviet PPS H-41s, not as curiosities, not as trophies, as replacements for their own sidearms and submachine guns during close-quarters counterattacks. The drum-fed weapon's sustained fire capability was not a theoretical advantage. In the burned-out rooms of the Red October factory complex, in the stairwells of the Barricade gun works, it was the difference between clearing a room and dying in its doorway. The German MP-40 held 32 rounds. In a typical room-clearing operation inside the factory ruins, a soldier expended 30 to 40 rounds, crossing a threshold and establishing control. 2 rooms, and the MP-40 was empty. Reload required both hands, a moment of stillness, and 3 to 4 seconds that Soviet soldiers had learned to exploit with murderous efficiency. The PPS H-41 carried 71 rounds, 2 rooms, and the drum was not empty. 3 rooms, and a soldier still possessed enough ammunition to suppress whatever came through the next door. This was not a nuance. This was survival arithmetic. By December 1942, captured German operational orders began formally acknowledging the Papasha by name. Unit commanders were instructed to account for enemy drum magazine weapons in defensive calculations. Anti-tank rifle teams, Panzerbuch 39 operators attempting to engage T-34S, at 150 meters were being overrun before they could complete their second bolt cycle. The PZB-39 required 6 to 8 seconds between shots. Soviet submachine gunners needed 2 seconds to cross 30 meters of rubble, when suppression eliminated the defenders' ability to hold their position. The armor survived. The anti-tank teams did not. Inside the ruins, the chrome-lined barrel of the PPS H-41 proved another industrial masterstroke. The barrel itself was cut from surplus Mosin-Nagant rifle blanks, the Soviet arms industry simply repurposing existing production infrastructure already configured for 7.62 millimeters bore dimensions. Chrome plating extended barrel life to approximately 10,000 rounds before accuracy degradation became tactically meaningful. German MP-40 barrels suffering extraction failures below -25 degrees Celsius as recoil springs contracted in the Russian winter began jamming mid-cycle in conditions the PPS H-41's simpler mechanism absorbed without complaint. During the pre-dawn hours of January counterattacks in 1943, when temperatures around Stalingrad fell to -30, German soldiers spent 20 to 30 seconds warming their weapons by body heat before the bolt would cycle. Soviet assault groups closed the distance during those 30 seconds. The cold was not a shared hardship. It was a Soviet tactical advantage stamped into every PPS H-41 that rolled off the press. The introduction of a 35-round box magazine in 1942 sharpened the weapon further. The original 71-round drum was magnificent in volume but punishing in weight. Loaded, it added 1.8 kilograms to a weapon that already weighed 3.63 kilograms, a total of 5.43 kilograms. That soldiers could only carry twice before their load capacity buckled. The box magazine weighed 0.45 kilograms loaded. 6 box magazines gave a soldier 210 rounds at the weight the drum system required for 142, a 48% increase in ammunition capacity at equivalent load. By 1943, reconnaissance battalions operating ahead of Soviet tank formations sustained firefights for 40 minutes without resupply, a duration that forced German rear guards into premature retreat rather than risk encirclement by units that simply did not run dry. This was the weapon that transformed Operation Bagration. In June 1944, when Army Group Center ceased to exist as a fighting formation, destroyed in 8 days with losses exceeding those of Stalingrad, the instrument of its annihilation was not only Soviet armor and air power, it was Soviet infantry equipped at densities the Wehrmacht could not match. Where a German infantry company of 120 men typically fielded 3 or 4 MP-40 submachine guns, a Soviet rifle company of identical size deployed 20 to 30 PPS HE-41 South. Close-range firepower density multiplied by a factor of 7. German rifle fire attempting to answer Soviet assault groups expended 4 to 5 carabiner rounds for every PPSH burst that washed over their positions, draining ammunition at rates the Reichsbahn's collapsing rail network could no longer replenish. At factory number 367 in Vatsky Polyany, in the Kirov Oblast east of the Urals, Workers operating 3 shifts across 7 days produced 523 PPSH-41s per day during peak 1944 output, a single facility. More weapons per day than all German MP-40 production lines combined could deliver in a month. The stamping press did not need artillery training or infantry tactics. It needed steel, electricity, and the decision of a central state to manufacture killing at industrial scale. By 1945, Soviet factories had delivered 6,270,000 PPSH-41s to frontline formations, 6,270,000 weapons, against a carabiner 9.8K that required 13.22 man-hours per unit. The mathematics of that production velocity surpassed the imaginative capacity of any German logistics planner in 1941. And then came Berlin, May 1st, 1945, the Reichstag district. Smoke from 10,000 fires turned the afternoon sky the color of rust. The 8th Guards Army entered the capital of the Third Reich with 47,000 submachine guns, distributed among 280,000 soldiers, 1 weapon for every 6 men. In the street-by-street fighting through the government quarter, through the ministry buildings, and the underground bunkers and the subway tunnels, where fanatical SS units made their final stands, the PPSH-41 completed what it had begun in the hallways of the Red October factory 3 years before. It ended the contest in the only way industrial logic could end any contest. Not with one decisive blow, but with an accumulation of firepower that the opposing philosophy of precision and craftsmanship could never arithmetically match. German soldiers defending the Reichstag perimeter in those final hours carried whatever weapons they could find. Some carried STG-44 assault rifles, Germany's own belated attempt to answer the volume problem. But the STG-44 had arrived too late, and in quantities far too small to change the equation. Some carried bolt-action carabiners that had served their owners since 1941, and some, the veterans, the survivors, the men who had made it from the Volga to the Spree by learning everything the war could teach, carried captured PPSH-41s, the ugly, stamped, drum-fed weapon that Soviet factory workers had built in 8 seconds at a time, that Georgian arms designers had conceived in the ruthless clarity of industrial necessity, the Papasha, the Little Father, the weapon that German officers had been preferring over their own since Stalingrad. When the Soviet flag rose over the Reichstag on May 2, 1945, it was carried by soldiers whose weapons had been manufactured faster than German replacements could be trained, distributed faster than German supply lines could be maintained, and fired in volumes that German infantry doctrine had no answer for. The war on the Eastern Front was many things. It was ideology and atrocity and human endurance at scales history rarely records. But at the level of a hallway, at the level of a doorway, at the level of 2 soldiers, occupying the same 20 meters of rubble, it was also a contest between 13.22 man-hours and 5.6 man-hours, between a philosophy of perfection and a philosophy of sufficiency, between a weapon built to impress and a weapon built to win. Hauptmann Voss survived Stalingrad. He was one of the fewer than 6,000 men from the 91,000-strong 6th Army who returned to German soil alive. He was not captured carrying a carabiner. He was not captured carrying an MP-40. He was found in a Soviet prisoner column in February 1943, frostbitten, half-conscious, gripping a PPSH-41 with a drum magazine he had taken from a dead Soviet soldier 3 weeks before. His carabiner was somewhere in the rubble of the Red October factory. He had not gone back for it. There was a lesson in that. There always is. The Germans built the finest bolt-action rifle of the Second World War. Precise, beautiful, a craftsman's masterpiece in every measurable dimension. The Soviets built something crude, fast, and relentless, a weapon born of necessity and stamped from raw industrial will. History tends to remember the beautiful things, but history also records with perfect impartiality which side fired more rounds. The Carabiner 98K's 13.22 hours of machined precision had met 5.6 hours of stamped steel, and found, in the burning hallways of a century's worst war, that beauty was no answer to volume and perfection was no answer to enough. If this deep dive into the weapons and logistics that shaped the Second World War left you thinking, subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and leave a comment below. History is always more extraordinary than the textbooks admit. We'll see you in the next one.